Hey, welcome back. Okay, so here's a question for you. Are you a lover of poetry? If you are a lover of poetry, you are in the right place today. My name is Dacquino. Our guest today is Margo Taft Stever. What an incredible woman. What a passion for poetry. You have got to meet Margo. Margo, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. You are certainly a very accomplished poet. You've done a number of books. You are even a founder of a writers group in Terrytown. Tell me, who is Margo and when did your passion begin?
I started writing when I was in grade school.
Wow.
And continued to write throughout high school. I didn't think of myself as writing a poem until I had the fortune of transferring into a writing workshop at MIT that Denise Levertov
Wow.
taught, and I was able to take a workshop with her, which totally transformed my life because she believed that what I was writing was poetry, and I started really committing myself from then on to a life of poetry.
You know, it's amazing. I talk to poets and writers, and I say, was there a special inspiration? Now, that's an important question for me. I taught school for 35 years, and you always hope that there is that kid who someday comes back and says, I'm a writer because of you. You did this, and it feels so good. And you, as the founder of a writers group, must understand that, because there's so many people out there who have been touched by you, because being a member of a writers group gives you the opportunity to have someone to bounce off of, so that, you know, I have a wonderful opinion of my writing, but I need to hear it from somebody else.
Well, we have the flyer there. Could we show it to them?
Sure.
This is the Hudson Valley Writers Center's flyer, and we have a reading series, and we also have a small press and publish poetry only.
Okay, so we'll slow up for a minute. It's the Hudson Valley Writers Center.
Yes.
It's located in Sleepy Hollow.
Yes, it's located in Sleepy Hollow in what was an abandoned railroad station.
Wow.
Which we mounted a huge campaign to restore, and we were able to raise close to $1 million over a long time.
Wow.
To restore the building, and we got money from numerous sources, both state and private, and
it's a wonderful place. I mean, it's, you know, I was there. I was talking about one of my books, and, you know, just the atmosphere, this wonderful feeling of being in this train station, and meeting all of those people who really feel strongly about what they do.
Well, I think you're right. I think a train station is a great place for a writer's center,
Yeah.
because so many things happen in train stations, and people greet, you know, family, they say goodbye to people for the last time, and it's just an incredibly monumental kind of place. And this particular train station, it has extraordinarily beautiful architecture. It's very simple and small, but for instance, the walls are paneled with American chestnut, which is of course now a totally extinct tree because of a blight that occurred in the 1800s.
Wow.
But the walls are paneled with American chestnut, and we were very careful to restore it to extremely strict historical standards. So
Yeah, and Sleepy Hollow is Washington Irving country.
that's right. That's right.
One of our greatest writers. So it is a wonderful feel. So you wrote poems as a student and later got involved even more with writing. And you are a very accomplished writer. You have a number of books. Cracked Piano is your newest, yes?
Yes, this is Cracked Piano. I actually was lucky to have 2 of my poetry collections published in April. And on the other hand, it's kind of like having twins. So I've been running around like a chicken with my head cut off since then, trying to figure out what to do, because there's not much ways that poets have in terms of support for getting books out. So I've been trying to do readings and workshops and things like that. And And this is my chapbook that I published called Ghost Moose. This is really about the sixth extinction. Many of the poems are about animals and trying to give voice to animals, and thinking about what's coming up in the future, which I strongly believe everybody needs to get on board with, trying to do whatever we can to mitigate the disappearance of 30 to 50% of all animal species in this world that we live in. And let's try to make sure it's only 30 and not 50.
So Margot, the passion for poetry often comes from the passions of other things in your life, like animals.
Yeah.
And you use that passion to try to create a vehicle to get to people so that they can understand and feel what you feel about issues.
Yeah. I would say that for my first book, which is Frozen Spring, the impetus for my writing it had to do with my father's early death at age 42 from his second heart attack.
Oh, wow.
And then feelings of, abandonment and isolation, and also my brother's death from a drug overdose, which happened when he was about 40.
Wow.
One of my brothers. So those were really what went into the poems in Frozen Spring. Each book had a different kind of unifying principle of,
death,
in terms of...
I mean, death is one of those things. The Mary Loved Daisies is a book I put together when I was a third-year teacher. A girl I had in my first year of teaching died in a fire. And it was my first real death as a teacher. And it stayed with me for years. And at that time I said, someday, I want to write about it.
Yeah.
Well, it took like 20 or 30 years, but those things stay, and they stay forever, and they stay somewhere in the back of your mind. And I try to encourage writers to empty the trash, go in and get those things that hurt. Try to bring them to the surface and deal with them. And then in doing that, sometimes you help others deal with the things that hurt them.
Right. That's very true. The second collection that I wrote, my second full length, which is Cracked Piano, which we already talked about.
Why Cracked Piano?
Well, I was doing research on the 1905 U.S. diplomatic mission to Asia because I was working on a photography exhibition of photographs that my great-grandfather on my mother's side had taken of that mission. And in consequence, I ended up finding out about the William Howard Taft papers, which have a lot of family letters from going back to the beginning of my family. And I was able to find out about my great-grandfather on my father's side, Peter Rawson Taft, who had essentially become a disappeared person because he was hospitalized in the Cincinnati Hospital for the Insane. And as a result of that, no one ever talked about him. And the only thing I'd ever heard about him was that he was the first American to get a divorce, which wasn't true. I mean, it was just what my mother sort of said, oh, there's William Howard Taft, who was the president, your great-grandfather. Because Alfonso, who was William's father, was my great-great-grandfather, and he had two wives because his first wife died. And William is descended from the second wife. And so anyway, no one talked about him. And basically this book is really about the consequence of trying to hide and keep secrets in a family and how that has repercussions throughout generations. And it's really what
it comes back.
Yeah, it does. And some of the poems are actually, I found letters from him, and they're poems made of letters. They're found poems created from letters that he wrote, and also the hospital superintendent, and it really outlining the difference in the treatment of mental patients then and now.
Yeah. It's amazing to be able... Sybil Ludington has been a passion of mine for over 20 years, and recently I found letters, family letters, in the New York Historical Museum in New York City, and oh my God, letters written by Sybil herself.
Wow.
Between her siblings.
Yeah.
And there's so much information and history. We forget that when they talk about today, their today is our yesterday.
Right.
And there's so many wonderful things that we discover that we just didn't know before.
That's right.
So you are connected to the Tafts.
Yeah, my side of the family was more involved in communications, in in newspaper and television, rather than straight politics.
Right. Wow. Wow. So, all right, and you have a couple other books there you've written.
Well, I have the other books that I didn't bring the other chapbooks that
Okay.
but I have examples of Slappering Hall Press chapbooks, which is the small press that I founded in 1990, and we publish chapbooks by poets who haven't published a book or chapbook, and this is an example of one of the chapbooks that we published last year.
Okay, so let's stop there for a second. In addition to being a poet and writing books of your own, you are a publisher.
Well, I mean, yes.
You are in a publishing family.
I actually was, my family was involved with the Cincinnati Times-Star, and the Hudson Valley Writers Center is the publisher, and Slapping Hall Press is a small press imprint of the Writers Center, and I'm one of 3 co-editors. And
okay, so that's what I meant by writing family. A group of people who are working together.
That's right.
As a team.
And there are 2 other co-editors currently: Peggy Ellsberg, a wonderful poet and professor at Barnard, and Jennifer Franklin, another fantastic poet who is also the program director at the Hudson Valley Writers Center, and she's one of them, and we work together on the chapbook.
So you encourage people to publish their works.
Well, we have a contest every year in the spring for someone who has not published a book or chapbook, and then we have another series where we choose. This is an example of that chapbook. This was the first chapbook in this conversation series, in which we choose a woman poet a famous woman, well-known master woman poet, who chooses an emerging poet to be in the same issue. The one that's coming up will be Toy Darracott, and she's going to be choosing a poet. And so then we just have done a number of other ones.
So Margo, what you're saying is, and you people better listen out there, are you a poet? Are you looking to be recognized? Would you love to see your poem in print? This is a poetry opportunity. You have an opportunity to submit your work and either get it published or win a contest or get out there so that people can see and hear your poem. Now, we have a website for the Hudson River Institute, and there it is. Well, there's yours, the www.writerscenter.org. So if they have a poem and they send it there, will it get there?
Well, actually, what they would need to do is look on the website to find the guidelines for submitting.
Perfect
because
idea.
There's a date, a deadline, and there's also a chapbook is a specific thing, and each chapbook contest will have different guidelines, and ours are on the website, but they're shorter than a book. So this is another example of one of the Slappering Hall Press
So the
chapbooks.
definition of a chapbook, how does that differ from other books?
Well, a chapbook is actually, historically, I think began really with the beginning of the printing press, but has evolved over time. It used to be used for bringing the sort of news of the day. People would ride with chapbooks in early American history and hand out chapbooks with information and also writing. But what I think now chapbooks are mostly places where poets can introduce their work or write on a specific theme, and it's a more concise work because it's shorter.
So it's a poetry book with a specific purpose.
And usually it's not perfect bound. It's hand sewn or stapled. So it's just a different thing.
Yeah. Sounds good. So Margo, I am definitely putting you on the spot. You've written some poems and you brought them here.
Oh, yeah.
So I would love to hear an example of your work.
Great. Well, it's always difficult to choose a poem to read at any time, but
of course,
because you want to read like 50 of them.
You know, it reminds me of what one time a friend of mine who's a wonderful writer was speaking to my students, and one of the students said to her, "Miss Silman, what is your favorite work that you've done?" And she said, "Well, I have to tell you that my works are like my children. I love them all but in special ways. And some of them are special for different reasons.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So I chose a poem from Crack Piano, which, by the way, I got the title from one of the found letters, one of the letters that I made into found poems, letters written by my great-grandfather.
Oh,
so that's where
wonderful.
Crack Piano came from.
Wow.
But this is sort of a transitional poem in the sense that it's also very much about nature, and which is what I kind of think I'm more evolving into. I mean, I've always written about nature, but I'm sort of now interested in trying to talk about what's happening in the world today. But this is a kind of transitional poem. It's an elegy for my mother and also for nature. My mother is dying. In the place where she belongs, suffering erases itself, doves bring her seeds. Horses sleep next to her in the straw. Where she belongs, a welcoming place holds her, keeps her from running away, the greenness of the hay turning to gold. Already the rain's restless trajectory. My mother is busy dying. She no longer knows my name. This is the wind of Eden, the wand of change, the last slave of silence, the knave of rain. So quiet the roving of each vacant quest. Let her be buried in the sea by the seaberry, the briar rock, the fossil chamber. Alone, blown, roadside stray, the flown, restless, wayward ringing, bells clang, ocean downcast rolls. Wandering once again, now I return to the center, searching the level earth, calling her name, remembering that I am lost. The path unfurls before my dog and me, walking to the ocean, walking to the rocks, the ocean on one side, the bay on the other, eiders blessing the waves. The seagull's spontaneous burst, how it hurts with the radio blaring. My mother is dying, gone from a body that has abandoned her. Cry because everything goes haywire, because this is Apollo's siren lyre, the field-worn answer, the childless response, children waiting for some God to bring them home.
Beautiful. You are such a wonderful reader. Oh my God.
Thank you.
It brought me back to first time I heard a poem actually recited by the author was Robert Frost.
Oh wow, that was incredible.
Oh my God. I sat and I heard it over and over again.
Yeah,
I mean, I could
poet.
hear, two roads diverge in a yellow wood. And I was in the woods, and here I was with your mother. I was with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful poem.
Thank you.
Tell me, when you're done with a poem like this, do you do a Fonzie? You know what a Fonzie is?
I can't
Remember
remember.
the show called Happy Days?
I didn't watch it.
Well, in the beginning, this Fonzie stands in front of the mirror, he pulls out a comb and he goes, ah. When you were done, did you say, yes?
No, I didn't actually. I probably would.
I was hoping you would say that because it brings us back to the workshops. When you write a piece, sometimes you have to read it 100 times. Sometimes you have to read it out loud. And you have to let other people, and you have to look at their faces and see if they hear what you're saying.
Right, right. I just took a workshop actually at the Writers Center last weekend, taught by the two wonderful poets, Nicole Brown and Jessica Jacobs, who are also eco-poets. And they did it, but one of the workshops they did was on promoting books and also how to read a poem. And I've done a lot of readings, but I know I've made a lot of mistakes. And it was really exciting to sort of...
Tone of your voice, the right pause, the right moment.
Well, also things like I would read like that, and then because the book would be down here, and they said, well, just lift the book up so you don't, because it's so easy to just sort
and
of
connect. Sometimes that eye contact with the audience is just so. And so that is another very important point. That writing poems in your bedroom with the door shut and then putting them in the drawer isn't fair to the poem. A real poem has to be savored, and it has to go out there, and it has to meet some ears, and people have to hear. That's why I do the Mayapack Writers Workshop. That's why you do this workshop. If you are a poet, it's only fair. I mean, there's a big difference between a kid who takes a basketball and goes out in the driveway and shoots hoops by himself for an hour, and if he has 3 or 4 other kids with him. It changes the whole thing.
Right, right.
And this too, you need to have someone listening.
Yes, that's true. And of course, it's everyone's determination about what they want their audience to be. Some people might just want to write poems for their family, which is perfectly great.
And some to publish.
Right, right.
And opportunities to publish, we have to be honest, very difficult when it comes to poetry because there's not that many people publishing poetry.
That's absolutely true, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to start Slapping Hall Press, even though it's a very small press, just to be able to provide one more opportunity for poets who really don't have very many to get their first book published or chapbook.
One of the things I struggle with a number of my writers is the difference between being a writer and being a published writer. And for many years, the traditional publisher has been the gatekeeper. And they decided who comes in and who doesn't. And for many years, wonderful poets went to their graves with their work.
Yeah.
Which was a shame.
Yeah.
So this is an opportunity to get out there. And I always encourage writers to get out there. But, as you say, it depends on who you are and why you're writing. Some people write just to see their thoughts. And that's, poetry makes your thoughts visible. Sometimes just for you, sometimes for everyone.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes it's making the invisible visible, too.
Yep, and while I have you here, get visible again. Do you have another piece?
Sure. I'll read one from my chapbook, which is a poem titled End of Horses. I write to you from the end of the time zone. You must realize that nothing survived after the horses were slaughtered. We sleep below the hollow, burned out stars. We look into dust bowls searching for horses. When you walk in the country, you will be shocked to meet substantial masses on the road. We do not know whom to blame or where the horses were driven, who slaughtered them, or for what purpose. Had the horses slept under the linden tree, the generals and engineers pucker and snore on the veranda.
Wow. Was this poem a long time in coming poem, or did you write it as you discovered what was happening with horses?
Well, I would say both are true. I mean, I think that it was a long time in coming, but also it was not a long, it's a pretty recent poem, so I'm still sort of revising it, and I mean, although...
So it's a recent poem, but not a recent idea?
Well,
or both?
I would say it's a recent poem, but elements of it have been around for a long time, and it's certainly about what's happening now.
All right, so let me entertain my writers for a moment. When, where, and how often do you write, Margot?
I would say that really varies at different points of my life, and I think that most of my writing, or my most valuable writing that I ever did, was when my children were young and when I was forced to be at home and spend X amount of time waiting for them during their nap or working or whatever. And that just provided a really great opportunity, which sort of illustrates what I think writing is really about. A lot of people I talk to, and even I constantly say, I never have time. I have too much else to do.
There's always time for poetry.
I really want to write, but I just don't have time, or I'm doing too many other things. But the point is, I remember Michael Burckhardt, a wonderful poet, when I was at Sarah Lawrence, said once that you should duck into a corner and write. So, I mean, I think that's really true. And for a while, just after both these collections were out. I really didn't think I had much time to write. I just felt frenzied and sort of freaked out in a certain way. But now I'm really getting back to, I mean, because writing, I think, for me, different poems are written in different ways. Sometimes I do a lot of research, so it really does require reading and that kind of thing. And then sometimes I'll just, I mean, very rarely have I just sat down and written a poem. I mean, it does happen sometimes.
Yeah, but you know, that I tell writers, look, if you think that the greatest poem ever written is sitting on the edge of your brain, ready to fall out into a best-selling collection of poetry, you're probably wrong. You don't write a piece, you work a piece.
Right. Well, I mean, I remember speaking with Denise Levertop about this, and she almost said something to the effect that a poem is just, well, I mean, you don't necessarily write the poem. The poem can just come to you in a certain way that you can't even take responsibility for it. But on the other hand, I remember her also saying, you have to be there. You have to try to provide the discipline. And I think that really makes a huge difference between why some people do end up really doing something with their work and others who don't. You have to give yourself some time and a place and sit down and do it.
Yeah, I tell writers sometimes that some poems are like dreams. I have nothing to do with them. They seem to formulate themselves, and they happen without my help. They're there. And some poems are there. And as a poet, you need to get inside, find out who you are. And there's probably no better therapy than poetherapy. The opportunity to use poetry to get into your heart, your soul, your anger, your emotions. Poetry is a wonderful vehicle to get inside. Now, Margot, I have bad news for you. We have about 1 minute left.
My goodness.
Any final words to these writers out there?
Let's see. Well, come to the Hudson Valley Writers Center and come to some of our incredible readings that are coming up. I'm doing a reading, actually I'm really lucky to be doing a reading on October 4th with Arthur Z., who's been longlisted for the National Book Award for his most recent book of poetry, Sightlines, and who was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for his other recent book, Compass Rose, and Suzanne Cleary, who's a phenomenal poet who's published 4 collections, and her most recent is called Crude Angel. And she will also be reading with me at the Hudson Valley Writers Center on October 4th at 7. And we have, on the 11th, we have a great environmental writer, Larry Reiner, who wrote Garden Revolution, and he is an award-winning landscape architect, typewriter, and designer. Okay, so take out your pencils. October 4th, 7 o'clock, Sleepy Hollow. Give me the address so they can put it in there. Yes, it's 300 Riverside Drive.
300 Riverside Drive. Put it in your GPS.
But it's a good idea to get a ticket beforehand, just in general. Not that we're usually sold out, but just in case, just get a ticket. And they're, I think they're, I can't remember, they're around $5 or $10.
$5 is worth every nickel. Hudson Valley Writers Center. Look it up on your computer. Oh, thank you for being here today. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You were wonderful.
Thank you.
You were wonderful.